Hello, good world. Welcome to another episode of the Tyler Hill Podcast. It is a special episode today. I am recording this on Wednesday morning, November 19th, which is my 35th birthday. Cue applause. Just kidding. I am here by myself in my basement office while the kids are getting dropped off at school and I am starting my work day. Yes, it is true. I am 35, and so what I wanted to do was kind of just riff a little bit. I had a friend over, Elijah. What's up, dude? I'm sure you're listening. We were talking about the podcast. He's one of my loyal listeners, and I was sharing with him some of my insecurities around the podcast and around all the content I make on Instagram or Substack. You know, it's very vulnerable to share your stuff with the world. And I was talking about, doing so many interviews and a couple of the episodes where I've riffed and taught or just kind of shared like I am doing today. And he said, Tyler, I'm not going to lie. I love your guests, but the episodes where you just riff a little bit are my favorite episodes, which is just so funny, and it just reminded me of how often, even with my clients, this is the case. The things that we are often so insecure about or that we get in our heads about, so much of that stuff just actually isn't even true. Like, we make up all of these stories that form our life and that shape our life. We tell our stories based on, maybe messages we've inherited or woundings that we have or theologies that were given to us. And then we live into those stories. And a lot of the times those stories are made up. They're actually not true. And all that to say, I am sitting here vulnerable a little bit. I talk on stage a lot, but figuring out what my voice is behind the microphone here on a podcast when I can't see people, when I don't get a lot of feedback, is still just interesting and hard. But Elijah said this was a good idea, and there's some stuff I was really excited to think about and reflect on as it relates to this last year, 34, turning 35, as well as, just reflecting on the totality of my life. And I have some fun news that I'll start leaking on this episode about where I'm headed and what is going on in our life. So that being said, as I continue to move forward to some of these goals, your support and your engagement means the world. So if you could, review this podcast or give it some stars, if you could go follow me on Instagram or Substack, if you search The Tyler, ThuhTyler, in any of those platforms, it would be incredibly helpful. This year has been a lot, if I was to be totally honest. I've experienced some things that I've never experienced before, and a lot has changed. And as I was writing down all of the things that has happened to me and my family this year and things that we've done, I was surprised at how much has happened. When I first started to kind of write down some of the things in my life over the last year, I had a sense of like unaccomplishment or sort of a simmering bummer attitude that I haven't done as much as I've wanted to do. In fact, I have this thing called the Big Ass Calendar that hangs on my wall, and it's my yearly planner, and my wife and I do it every year. And what's interesting is I accomplished most things on that list, not everything, and I still feel kind of behind. Again, back to those stories we tell ourselves. This might have actually been one of the more adventurous and exciting and fun and risky years of my life, and yet I could just sense in my spirit the attitude I had toward myself, which is just so fascinating. Again, really forcing me to consider how do I view myself, and do I view myself in an accurate light as it pertains to what really is going on. You might even ask yourself today, what are some of the stories you're telling yourself, about this year, about your dreams, about your finances, about how good of a parent you are, and are those stories true? Because the stories we tell impact the way we live, and that's just the bottom line. The stories we tell impact the way we live. And I was just really surprised at how awesome and albeit challenging this year really was. One of the really big highlights this year is I've been a Wim Hof Method certified instructor for the year. Over the last 12 months, I had the opportunity to finish my certification, and I actually got to meet Wim Hof, who is one of my heroes, is somebody who has changed my life for the better. And so over the last couple years, I worked on my certifications there, and I've gotten to spend a lot of time helping people get in tune with their body, really learning how to leverage their breath and the cold to optimize not only their health, but their spiritual life and their mental health. And that's been really fun. And, just to even think that I got to meet one of my heroes and get a couple pictures and sit in the cold tub with him was really special, and that was a really, really big highlight. And speaking of that, we're gonna be launching 2 or 3 Wim Hof Method workshops in the new year, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I got to go on a really fun road trip with my friend Brian, and he was going to Texas this year to pick up a trailer that he had built. And that was one of those moments where I had a week full of clients. He asked me if I wanted to go, and I said yes. And it was one of those things where it's like I didn't really have the money to go. I needed to see my clients. I needed to really, there was every excuse to not go on this like 6 or 5 day road trip with my friend Brian. But I just decided to say yes anyways. And it was not exactly the most exhilarating trip of all time. Like, we were driving through really boring Texas. We did get to stop at Buc-ee's. We picked up his trailer. We slept in the trailer and turned home and made our way home. Just a couple days out there in the desert of Texas. But it's so easy to say no to things. And at the beginning of the year when we went on this road trip, I just made the effort to say yes. And I think that's important for a few reasons. One was I actually didn't lose any money as much as I thought I was going to lose clients. Again, telling myself this goofy story. My clients all rescheduled. And not only that, but I got to spend a week with one of my best friends. Some of the fruit of that was we spent a lot of time in the car, and he was on the verge of a new part of his health journey. And he's told me this numerous times over the years, just hearing some of my story and how I talk about my health and how I've approached my health and not drinking alcohol anymore and being vegan, and all of these things really helped inspire much of his life change. And just to think that I almost didn't go, and it's, for him, he would say many times, it was one of the moments that really impacted how he is living his life moving forward. Now, I bring that up because I think last year or the year before, I probably would not have been as spontaneous or adventurous. But if you remember, almost 50 episodes ago of this podcast, I started podcasting because they found an unruptured aneurysm in my brain. And I still have the unruptured aneurysm. And the reality is, if this aneurysm does burst in my brain, I would pass away. And a while ago, when they diagnosed me with this ailment in my brain, it was one of those memento mori sort of experiences where you really have to consider what would happen if I died. And of course, when you ask that question, it takes you to a lot of sad and scary places, but it also takes you to sort of a creative state and a creative place. I owe so much of some of the things I'm going to share about on this podcast to that diagnosis. But as I was kind of making that bucket list, right, the sort of impulse when you think about dying, at least this is the case for me, and I see this a lot with my clients as well, you start thinking, what are all the things I want to do before I die? what are all the things that I want to do before my die? And I started writing out that list, all the things that I wanted to do and be and create. And the list just kept getting longer. I have a huge imagination. There's a lot of life I want to live. I have a multitude of ideas. And interestingly enough, that list just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And there came a moment one morning when I was doing breath work in my office where I realized I was doing a breath retention, and this thought just popped into my mind. And I realized that even if I lived to be 100, there was no way I would be able to do everything on that list. Which is interesting to consider, right? Okay, if I lived to be 100, there's no way I'd be able to do everything on that list, which is to say, how could I expect myself to do even remotely that much stuff if I die soon? Now, just so you all know, they don't think this aneurysm is going to rupture soon necessarily, although I do need to get it checked out from time to time. So if I'm not going to get everything done on this list over the course of my life, then that begs the question, which things do I really focus on? And this year, I think, as I look at this list of all the fun and the beauty and the cool dreams that have happened, a lot of that has not been a result of trying to make the most of this year. I would say, in fact, it's been actually exactly the opposite. It's because I've focused on only a couple things that really, really matter to me. And I haven't spent all my energy on the big, giant dreams. I haven't spent all my energy on what necessarily do I want to do before I die, or all of the things that I want to do before I die. I have actually cut the list by 98%. And I said, what are the 2 or 3 things that I care about the most? What are the 2 or 3 things that I want to ensure happens no matter what? And here's what that did. Is first of all, it created space in the totality of my life and in the totality of my schedule, because I'm not trying to do every single thing that I think I should be doing. I've had a lot of space for margin. I've had a lot of space for work. I've had a lot of space for spontaneous road trips with my friends to Texas because my calendar actually had the space. This year, I've gone on more adventures than ever before. I've lived more life because I've been less busy, which is so counterintuitive, I think, to the culture that we're often taught. If you want to have an interesting life, if you want to live life to the most, you've got to fill it with good shit. And for me, it was like, actually, I'm going to focus a lot on one dream, and I'm going to focus on making sure I'm home with my kids and family more than anything else. And aside from that, I'm not really going to fill my schedule up with too many adventures. We'd had trips here or there. We were doing a lot of fun things, but I wasn't trying to build something. I wasn't trying to start multiple businesses or do multiple creative projects. And the distillation, focusing on 1 or 2 things that were the most important to me, created so much more space. For example, to go on random road trips. But not only that, I was given the emotional and energetic space and the spiritual space to make the most out of what I was really focusing on. And lo and behold, when I'm not overworked, when I'm not exhausted, the cool things that I really wanted to do, I did better than ever before. And I got them done faster, which, ironically enough, by not trying to do so much, I probably did more than ever before. The point is, I think, as I even move forward into my 35th year, is that my bucket list is going to get even smaller. My list of goals is going to get actually smaller. And if this last year taught me anything, that if I hold an appropriate amount of ambition, which isn't to say laziness, which isn't to say being passive, I'm a very proactive person, but that I'm not going to overload my proactive posture, it's going to create, I think, more space for me to live the life that I want to live. And speaking of living the life that I want to live, I want to tell a story here about one of the more monumental things that has happened with my wife and I this year. As many of you know, I've been a pastor at a church down on the west side of Colorado Springs for the last almost 7 years. And it's a place that I've been incredibly proud to have participated in. I've been incredibly proud to have helped grow and steward it. It's a church community that does an impeccable job of tending to the homeless, cultivating a community for addicts, for people who are working to get sober, people who are on their way out of prison and reintegrating into regular life. But it's also just a really good place for kind of the spiritual misfits, for a lot of them at least, like folks who just are not sure where they belong and just want a place to gather. It's been a place that I've just been so proud to work at, and being a pastor has been one of my greatest joys in my life. But this year is, as actually just a couple weeks ago, I had my last Sunday at the church. I resigned. And the resignation has been happening over the course of a couple months, but my last Sunday was a couple weeks ago. And it was as a shock to so many people in the community. It was a brutally difficult decision to get to. And I want to talk just a little bit about what that process was, because in every way, leaving such a place that makes so much impact, leaving a place that has cultivated so much beauty, a place where I really got to leverage and express my gifts in a pretty profound way, it doesn't make sense necessarily that I would leave. And leaving is truly one of the hardest things I've done. I mean, tending to people and cultivating these relationships is just such a deeply interconnected and personal thing. And yeah, it was really, really hard. And yet it was just time, and it was so necessary. And why? So what was sort of the impetus or the fuel that made this transition happen? Well, first of all, I'd like to share about the way in which my wife and I, independently but also collaboratively, have had a similar dream over the course of our lives that goes back to even when we were dating 13 years ago. And it's had different names and different ways in which we've sort of wanted it to happen. And we still don't exactly know what it's going to look like, but we've always wanted a monastery of some kind. We've called it a modern monastery, an urban monastery, a spiritual center, and it's taken many forms in our imagination. But over the course of starting the coffee company many years ago, my wife had started a bakery many years ago, and working to start the cocktail bar, and all of the things I've done, being a pastor, and it just never quite made manifest. It never quite made it into our action plan. And my wife was going through a really hard season a couple years ago, and she was experiencing some postpartum depression. She was going to therapy and getting a lot of help. And in that time, she was also the executive director at a big nonprofit. And, it wasn't a big nonprofit, but she had a big role at the nonprofit, and she was crushing it. She increases fundraising and systems, and she is really, really good at her job. And, and we are a team, and we do a lot together. And so for my wife to have just come home one day and told me that she resigned from her job, this was a few years ago, I thought, oh my gosh, something must have happened, because we didn't really talk about it. It was such a surprise. She was like, I quit. And I was a little anxious, and I was a little confused because, we didn't really talk about it. And yet, because of the team-like nature of our relationship, to hear her make such a sort of a radical choice in such a kind of what at the time felt impulsive, I knew something was beyond that. And so as we talked it out, there was really two things at play there. One was her soul was withering in that job. It wasn't a role that she was supposed to have. And she is in tune, and her soul was singing. Her heart, as St. Benedict would teach us, the ear of her heart heard that it wasn't the place that she was supposed to be. And so she left. But more than that is that she was being pulled toward something. And there's a little bit of wisdom here that I really would like to share. I can remember when my wife and I were in premarital counseling with our pastor, and we wanted to move to California. we kind of wanted to get out of Colorado Springs, and we wanted to go try something new and move to California. And Daniel, our pastor, sat us down when we were contemplating that, and he said, "Tyler, it sounds like you're leaving. It doesn't sound like you're going anywhere." And he said, I always bless people when they're going somewhere. But when you're just leaving something, just for the sake of leaving it, that's hard to get my head around. And the truth was we were just leaving. We were just trying to escape some shit that we didn't want to face. And that's just not a wise thing to do. And so I was thinking about that with Chelsea, and we were talking it out. Are you just leaving because the job is hard? Are you, what's going on here? And she just emphatically knew that it was time to move toward our urban monastery. And so to know that in her soul she knew, first of all, this wasn't the place for her to be. But more so, it wasn't because she was leaving it because she hated it, because she didn't like it. Sure, she wasn't thriving. But most of the reason she wasn't thriving was because she and we were supposed to be going to something. We were supposed to be moving toward this monastery. And so what she said is, it's time to go all the way. It's time to cannonball, skinny dip, jump off the top of the diving board into this dream that we've had. She was moving towards something, and that movement compelled her to make a radical choice. You might ask yourself as you're considering how you're moving through life. Are you moving toward something, or are you just running away from something? And moving towards something is always so wise. So she left, and that meant that I was making all the money. That meant that everything sort of was based on the work that I was doing in regards to how our family was making it. And Chelsea started supporting me in my work, as well as she started working toward building the foundations of what this center is going to be. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But what became just so interesting is as she moved toward something, it started to stir my heart toward something. And this is usually the case in our world. The more you move into your fullness, the more you move into your divine identity, the more that you become freely and fully yourself, it inspires everyone else around you to do the same. And this was unequivocally the reality with my wife. The more that she kept moving toward her fullness, it started to stir something in me. So I really began to start feeling that my role at the church was changing, but I didn't know when or how, and there was just a lot that was there. And this really began to cultivate one of the biggest lessons that I've learned this year, and especially as it relates to self-love, as it really relates to love myself, to allow myself to be happy. And what really was the conduit to this lesson for me that ultimately led to this big risk, this big transition, was I had been leading a retreat in Salida up in the mountains. And on my way down from that retreat, I can't share all the details, but I drove up on a car wreck, and there was a car on fire, and I had to crawl inside of it. And eventually there was a young woman who had been thrown from the car who was deceased, and I was pretty much the first on scene there, and held her while all this stuff happened, and we had to wait for the paramedics to drive up the canyon. And it was just 10 out of 10 the most traumatic thing that I've experienced in terms of like kind of the brutality and what I saw. And so of course I end up going to therapy and doing EMDR and really working through some of the PTSD. In fact, the other on Halloween, excuse me, on Halloween I started having some flashbacks again, which was interesting, and it was a really, really tough thing. But what had happened, I think, inside my soul as a result of that, again, memento mori, mortality, let alone just the amount of work it takes to just get through seeing what I saw, really took me inward. So not only was I trying to just navigate this traumatic experience and trying to learn how to close my eyes again without having these like visions, I was just doing inner work again, hard inner work, working on healing and becoming whole. And the more that you do that, the more everything starts to become illuminated. And what started to illuminate for me was my pull toward this new vision, my pull toward this new dream. But the hardest part about it, the hardest part of this was the fear of disappointing one of my best friends who was my boss and pastor, all of the hundreds of people who I've dedicated their babies, I've done funerals for their loved ones, I've done so many weddings. The amount of times people have come to me and given me their drugs or their weapons when they're done being in a gang, all of this crazy, beautiful stuff that I had experienced. For me to leave felt selfish. It felt like I was abandoning all of these other people. And what I really had to begin to work on was that loving myself, taking care of myself, listening to my heart, again, the ear of my heart, as Saint Benedict invites us to do. It is not selfish. In fact, it often is a blessing to step into our destiny, to step into our fullness, even if it sometimes disappoints us. In fact, what one might call ego, to say like, oh, like it's egoic to just sort of do whatever I want and go follow my dreams. That's what I was scared of. Am I just being selfish? Am I just doing whatever I want? Look how big my ego is. Well, the reality is by not doing that, it probably is more egoic, because when I'm not stepping into my fullness, I'm not creating space for other people to step into theirs. And when I'm not stepping into my fullness, when I don't love myself to chase my dreams, when I don't love myself to even know what my dreams are. So, for example, when I was dishonoring myself by staying at the church longer than I should have, that really was about me. I don't want to disappoint these people. If I leave, then I'm going to hurt them. It was all about me, which is what the ego is always about. It's always about me and self-preservation. What will they think of me if I leave? What will the narrative be if I leave? What will all those people think and say about me? Every time I went against my heart telling me to move along, my ego actually made it about me. And what I had to begin to realize was that two things. One was doing things for me. Honoring my dreams, my passions, my goals isn't just about me. In fact, that's often what creates space for other people to thrive. When I left Loyal Coffee many years ago to actually go kind of start my spiritual journey, I remember having a similar feeling. I do so much work here, and so many of the people here are well taken care of because I'm their boss, and I have so many ideas, and a lot of the marketing ideas I've done have worked, and my design has worked, and all of this stuff has worked, and if I leave, what will happen? And all of these people have jobs. And again, it was making me the focal point, the complete center of the ecosystem. One of the things that happened that is so cool is when I left, it created space for for like two different people to have full-time jobs. Which is to say, I was also doing a lot of work. I was doing the amount of work for two people. But when I left Loyal Coffee, it created space for two baristas to take salaried jobs, which when you work in the service industry, to get a salaried job is so special, right? And that wouldn't have happened if I didn't leave. When I made it all about myself, those people were sitting there with tons of potential, not getting an opportunity to thrive within their gifts because I wasn't willing to step into mine. And the same thing, my friends, has happened here at Sanctuary. When I left, it created space for one of my friends to move from Portland back to be close to his family, to have his first job as a pastor, the dream that he has always wanted. Me stepping into my dreams, me stepping into my destiny is actually in no way selfish. In fact, it's probably the most selfless thing I could do. To take it even further, the more that I'm in alignment with my divine calling, the better I am going to be at serving others, the better I'm going to be at serving my kids, the better I'm going to be at helping other people because I'm in alignment. When I'm not in alignment, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I'm uninspired, I'm not doing anything cool. But when I'm inspired, when I'm aligned, when I am in my true self, not only do other people get space to be their true self, but I get to leverage my gifts to their fullest potential. So even look at the sort of like the domino effect, like Chelsea steps into her destiny, which inspires me to step into mine. And as I step into mine, it creates space for other people. We owe it to the world to become our best self. We owe it to the world to chase our dreams, to take risks, to step away from things, to quit things from time to time so that we can create space for other people. And I had to recognize that me doing what was right for me it doesn't mean I'm bad. It doesn't mean I'm awful. Every time we do something for ourselves, for what it's worth, it simultaneously will mean that we're not doing something for someone else. And I think that was one of the biggest realizations that Krista, my therapist, had really helped awaken me to. That I had this sort of silly idea that I had to always be helping every person, and that if I was disappointing some people, then that might have been a sign that what I'm doing is wrong. But the reality is you can't always, in fact, you never can step into your fullness while making everybody else around you happy at the same time. And so I had to learn how to love myself enough and value myself enough. I had to learn how to value the dreams that God gave me enough so that simultaneously I could step into my destiny. But what that would mean is that I would also disappoint some people. And the thing that I had to learn was that the disappointment that some people would experience did not equate to me being a failure, to me doing something bad, to me harming others. Other people's disappointment was not a metric by which I could measure my accuracy of love, of beauty, of going toward my dream. The necessity for water, for me to drink water, whenever I drink water, it means somebody else isn't getting that water. And there are other people that also need water. And for me to take an appropriate amount of water because I need it is not inherently selfish. It's necessary and it's okay. In fact, if I'm not dehydrated, then I can also use my skills to help other people get the water they need too. And this can only come from a place where we believe that we are worthy, that we're beloved, that we can have the water we need, and that's okay. So I quit, and I'm no longer a pastor at the Sanctuary Church, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Specifically, announcing to the congregation that I was leaving is by far one of the hardest things that I've done over the last couple of years. And one of the things that my therapist also had taught me in that season was that if my job is to show people a healthy and holistic way of living, one of the things I have to do is also show them that people change. And that this idea that we have to be exactly the same or that we're supposed to be exactly the same forever and always just is not a way of serving or loving people well. And so it ended up, I believe, being a vital part of my spiritual formation teaching. I was the pastor of spiritual formation as well as a spiritual director there. And it was kind of my last lesson of spiritual formation was showing them that people change and that is a healthy part. We evolve, we grow. In fact, if we don't change, if we don't evolve, it's actually a bad sign. It's actually a sign that we haven't been doing or becoming all that we were created to be. And so I've changed, and now my wife and I, drumroll please, are working full-time on developing something we're calling the Center for Beloved Living. And there's still so many pieces going. We literally are in the first minute of the first quarter as it relates to putting together our business plan and raising money. And I'm going to share so much more about that as time goes on. But we're going for it. We're risking it for the biscuit. So we both have quit our jobs, our most consistent jobs. And we're going toward our dream. I'm still doing spiritual direction. I see people one-on-one in my private practice, and I'm also doing Wim Hof stuff and leading retreats. And, I think another lesson that I've learned just time after time this year is that the more you let go of control, the more you surrender to the process, the more that you actually see the flow of the divine, the flow of abundance in your life. If you want more love, you've got to let go of trying to get it and manufacture it. If you want more money, you've got to stop clinging to it. If you want more ideas, you've got to finish projects and let go of the old ones that you've been working on over and over and over. You have to surrender. You have to let go. When I quit the Sanctuary Church, I didn't know, I had no plan for how we were going to pay the rest of our bills. The Sanctuary Church paid a fraction of our monthly budget. And my wife had already quit her job in pursuit of something beautiful. And I had quit my job in pursuit of something beautiful. And the scary part here was that we didn't know what was going to replace my income at the sanctuary, the church that I was at. But we let go. We let go of control, and we surrendered to this thing that we felt like was in the flow of the river of God. I remember having my meeting with the pastor of the church. His name is Derek. And he was so gracious to me and blessed me and has been such a good friend on this part of the journey. And I left that meeting feeling so cared for, intended to, and loved. Also terrified as to how I was going to feed the family and pay my mortgage and all of that stuff. And in 20 minutes, after I had let go and surrendered, I got a call from a friend. And this friend asked me if I still was leading breath work and doing meditation. And I said, absolutely. And he says, I'm starting a new rehab center in town, and I would love for you to lead breath work at this place 2 days a week, couple hours a month, couple hours a week. 2 different classes. And this was, again, only a few hours after I had resigned from the Sanctuary Church. And I said, yep, I still do that. He asked me how much I charge. I told him the amount that I had just stepped away from at the Sanctuary Church, and he said, that's barely outside of our budget. I would love to make that happen. Here you go. And so I quit the job without knowing how I was going to pay my bills. And it was only about 20 minutes before the flow of the river of God returned itself back into my hands after I had surrendered control. These are the kinds of things that I have experienced many, many times over in my life. That when we let go of control, the flow of God comes to us. Abundance comes when we surrender control, when we let ourselves just flow in the river. And it really was just another miracle of beauty. And so here we are. I'm doing my private practice. I'm coaching folks, and we're working on building the Center for Beloved Living, and it's happening. And it's just such a gift. And I think the next place I'd like to go there is just some of the pieces of advice or things that I've learned over the last handful of years that have helped me continue to pursue these dreams. And the first thing that I want to say is something that people don't love, and they don't believe me, really. And most people stay stuck in this. But there's a small handful of people that believe me when I say this. And I didn't come up with this. I think I stole it from Tim Ferriss. But that when this idea is embraced, the doors it opens up in life are transformative. They are incredibly profound. And the idea is this, is that reality is negotiable. That reality is negotiable. Most of us live within rules in our corporate settings, in our life with family, in the unspoken rules that we feel like we're supposed to live by. And we adhere to these rules in every conceivable way. This is how you raise money for a job. This is the only days off that I can have. This is the way that a career is built. You have to spend this much time on Instagram in order to build a following. I can't do this if that doesn't happen. We have all of these rules that we live by. And people often say, well, yeah, Tyler, but you've always worked at a church. You've not worked in corporate environments, which just isn't true. My wife and I have worked in pretty much every industry conceivable. And time after time after time again, I've realized that the rules by which we are told and we are governed by as it relates to how we exist in the world are way more flexible than we've ever been given credit for. And I think it can come down to even simple things like in what ways can you leave earlier so you can pick your kids up from school? Like, is reality negotiable? Have you ever thought about asking your boss or other coworkers how you could innovate a way so that you're always the one that picks your kid up from school? You might work in the most corporate environment. You might work at a bank. You might work, and yet there is probably a way, if you're willing to innovate, change some things up, negotiate, and let life be moldable, that you could make it happen. I was told, many years ago, not many years ago, a handful of years ago, that I needed thousands and hundreds of thousands of followers rather, to write a book. And I said, I don't believe that's true. I didn't want to live into that system. The first agent I got said, I can't be your agent unless you have 10,000 followers at minimum on one of your platforms, and then you need more on your others. And I thought, I'm not going to be a guy addicted to my phone, addicted to all of this stuff, and I started to figure out how else I was going to get a book agent and get a book deal without having thousands of followers. And I am closer than ever. I haven't signed a book deal yet, but stay tuned because we have some cool news coming out, it seems. But I didn't follow those rules. And when we started Loyal Coffee 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, I don't know, we had no money. None of us owned houses. None of us owned cars. Nobody had any business giving us money. And everybody said, if you have some assets that you can, use as proof, or if you have other businesses that you started, then we can give you money. And we just didn't have any of that. But we didn't let it stop us. We believed reality was negotiable. And I'd like to just challenge maybe one of the places where you feel stuck. And what if it was more pliable than you've allowed it to be? Oh, this is how the world is. Everybody needs a college degree to have this job. Or I need this much money to be able to go on this trip. Or I'll never be able to go on this trip. I'll never be able to go to Disney. Or I'll never be able to buy that piece of clothing. What if there was a way? And what if the way was much more simple than you thought? What if reality was negotiable? What if you've just been living by some rules that some other person made up? When you really think about it, and I don't have the time to break it down, hopefully this part's making sense. So many of the rules that we live by now have not been the rules that were in place forever. The thought that some of us are working from home now, that some of us get to make podcasts and say things around the world. There used to be so many gatekeepers and barriers to entry to be able to use your voice on a public platform. But reality is negotiable. Things change. People build technologies. The rules literally change. It used to be only a handful of people could make films, and now everybody can make films. Dads used to never stay at home to take care of their kids, and now they do. Reality is negotiable, and the most inspiring places I've seen this play out are not for the starving artist at home. Of course, so much of life is pliable. But the ways in which it's been the most inspiring is when I see doctors do their schedule in ways where they don't have to burn out. When I see bank tellers pick their kids up from school. When I see people enter into the places that are seemingly impossible to try and innovate, and they look at it with a new lens so that they can thrive in their mental health and their spiritual health, in their holistic health. Reality is negotiable. People ask me often, I've started multiple businesses, I've done creative projects, I've toured the world performing poetry and speaking. I've sold merch, I have traveled to dozens of countries. I've lived a really rich life. I'm wealthy in relationships. I'm wealthy in adventures. And I think the biggest secret that I have in that regard is that I don't play by all the rules that society has given me or that my bosses have given me. That there are ways to innovate, that you don't have to be a victim to a bad boss. And everybody thinks, oh, I've got to, that all bosses are bad and I've got to just sit in a cycle of just being subject to my bad boss. And I would say that is just not true. In fact, if you liberated yourself from that, if you tried to innovate yourself from that, you'd probably end up making more money and having more joy and having more time. It might take work in the short term as you mold a new life, but reality, my friends, is negotiable. How are you trying to innovate and do what you can to live life freely and fully yourself? What I want to do here, thanks for sticking around this long, is I asked on Instagram a little while ago to ask me some questions. So I'm going to do some rapid fire questions, and then I'll close with a few other thoughts here. And so I should be more professional and have found my question, but here's a couple of the questions that I've been given that I'm going to just sort of rapid fire answer for y'all, and then we'll see how we can land the plane of this podcast. My 35-year-old podcast. When did you first feel God instead of just believing in God? I would say there's two answers to that question. When did I first feel God instead of just believing in God? I would say I started to feel God when I started trusting that God loved me, when I really embraced this thought that I was beloved, that belovedness wasn't something that I had to earn, but rather it was an inheritance I've been given. So I am not beloved by God because I'm a Christian. I'm not beloved by God because I try not to sin. I'm not beloved by God because my sins aren't that bad. I'm not beloved by God because I work in a church. I'm not beloved by God because I live in America. I'm not more beloved than Muslims or Buddhists or atheists. I'm not less beloved than pastors and saints and monks. I am just unequivocally loved by God. And the more that I had allowed that to sink in, the less work I had to do to try and earn God's love. And the less that I've done to earn God's love, the more I've been able to feel God's love. Busy hands, my friends, can't receive good gifts. If my hands are busy, if my mind is busy, if my body is busy trying to earn the love of God, then it's really hard to experience it because I'm so busy doing other things that I can't just be open to feeling it. So when did I first feel it? I think is when I really began to understand that I am God's beloved. The second thing is as I really began to embody my life. And what I mean by that is as I began to tend to my body, doing things like getting in the cold plunge, eating well when I became vegan, going on runs. The more I got into my body, the more I recognized that if God dwells anywhere, even though God dwells everywhere, that God absolutely dwells within my body. And so the more in tune that I've gotten with my body, the more I've been able to feel God. What healing work changed you the most over the last few years? I would say that the healing, there's a lot there. I mean, unequivocally, going to therapy and going to spiritual direction, I think is a magic combo. That if you can afford it, to kind of oscillate between spiritual direction and therapy, maybe doing one of those each a month, has probably changed me the most. Being able to dig up things on a psychological level, put them on the altar of God and let God speak into them, letting things from my soul bubble up, and then seeing how that integrates with my psychology and my story has just been a potent recipe for healing. I would say as well, you always will hear me say this, is the Wim Hof method. I say that because the Wim Hof method has addressed so much of my person. It's helped me get rid of my migraines and has worked on inflammation in my body. It has helped me in my mental health, believing that I can do hard things. It has taught me how to meditate and sit in silence for hours upon hours at a time. And that work of doing the Wim Hof method has absolutely changed me a bunch. The third healing work that I would say is practicing creativity. So working on my book, I published a zine this year. I have been writing on Substack and making this podcast, creating out of your story, telling honest stories, absolutely has been transformative in my healing. I cannot make more clear that being creative, putting things out there, it doesn't just have to be on social media. It can be just all by yourself, but creation of some kind will heal you in ways that you have never known. What is one wound you are still healing? Just one? I only have to pick one? That is very kind of you. I think the biggest wound over the last about 6 months I have been healing is centered around money. And what's been interesting is the more I've paid attention to money, the more I've recognized how much there are other wounds inside of me that money is help pointing out. And I think as I've been learning a lot about this, that's in part why why Jesus in the scriptures talks so much about money. Not just for the sake of getting wealthy, not just for the sake of making a lot of money, although I don't think that's as bad as I used to make it out to be, that the way we view money illuminates a lot of what we believe about ourselves. Long story short, I just never really thought I was worthy of having any good gifts. And I've been given some really great gifts already. And so I've thought for most of my life, I feel like I've hit my blessing quota already. Like my wife loves me. My kids adore me. I've been given gifts of money so that I can chase my dreams. And I've gotten to start coffee shops and travel the world, all tons of cool shit. And I kind of have just felt like recently, as recent as like 6 months ago, that I hit my dream quota or I hit my wealth quota, that I'm not really going to get any more blessings from God because I've already gotten all of them. And as I've been learning about money and like that I actually don't want to be as poor as I've been, that I want to be able to bless my kids more. I want to be able to bless my wife more and go on trips and I want to be able to give money away. I've never really been able to give money away. I've given a lot of time away, but I've not given a lot of finances away. In order to do that, I need money. But in order to like do things that get me money, I need to believe that I'm worthy of it. Like I need to be able to start businesses that actually are financially sustainable. I need to charge appropriate amounts of money for my work. But thinking about money in this way hasn't just been about the money. Like I said, it really has illuminated some of these like underlying beliefs that I've had about God. Because if I believe that I've already worked out my blessing quota, then that means that I believe God only has a certain amount of blessings to give. And that's ludicrous. A good father does not stop pouring out gifts. A good father pours and pours and pours them out. If I had the resources, I would pour out more and more and more. And I do have infinite love to give to my kids, and I've never just thought, oh, they hit their blessing quota this month, I've got to stop blessing them. It's so stupid. And so thinking about money and healing some of these money wounds not only has helped me actually make more money, which has been nice, and I've been able to bless people and really step into some good things, it has also helped me learn on a deeper level how beloved I really am. Next question. If your platform exploded tomorrow, what would you want people to know first? I think I would start saying the same thing, that you are beloved, that you were born beloved, that belovedness is not something you earn, it's something that God gives you. It's a gift to receive. That salvation, that love, belovedness, all of these things are not anything you have anything to do with, actually, that it's just all a gift. I would say the same things that I always am saying. What did your ego build that your soul later had to gently dismantle? Interesting. What did your ego build that your soul later had to gently later had to gently dismantle. You know, there's so much to that. I'll share an interesting story here, and I know this podcast is getting a little long, but there was a time when I started really entering into my spiritual work that I really felt that I needed to be seen in a particular way. And this is absolutely the voice of the ego, right? The ego tells you in order to be good, to be right, in order to achieve good things, in order to, be the best version of yourself, that you need to be a certain way. And in short, I started to kind of dress down. I started to present myself as less than. In many ways, I was really trying to project to the world how spiritual I was. And I think, in short, what that was really me trying to chase some people away. Like, so the ego, what it does is when we feel insecure, when we feel less than, it tries to create these safety mechanisms so that we don't get hurt. And the more that I started to gain influence, I think the more my insecurities of, do I have good wisdom? Do I have something to offer? Those fears and insecurities really began to bubble up inside of me. And so what I did, and this is what the ego always does, is the ego creates enemies. And what I did is I created enemies out of the wealthy, out of people who were well put together, people who lived in the suburbs, people who had nice clothes, people who drove nice cars, people who had big followings on the internet. I made a lot of enemies. And of course, this wasn't outward, it was inward that I made these enemies. And then I said, I'm not going to be like them, that I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be the most holy, I'm going to be the most right, and so that I'm going to look a particular way. And so I grew out this giant beard, and I only had one pair of pants, and I made sure everybody knew I had a pair of pants. And I kind of looked gross. And this was one of my many ego armors that I had put out there. Another layer to that, back to the money thing, was I also was dealing with a lot of shame in that I didn't have any money, that it was really hard for us to make it. And still, we're paycheck to paycheck some months, not all months, but some months we are. And I felt shame like that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make, again, enemies out of the rich, and then I'm going to show them how holy I am because I'm poor, because I don't dress nice, that kind of thing. And again, what's so interesting is notice how we try to make enemies out of other people, but then the ego actually still just makes it all about you. Like, even deep down in my heart, I was saying, look at me, look how lowly I am, look how humble I am, which really wasn't true. I was asking for all the attention. So I, at one point, was struggling financially, mightily, and I went to one of my mentors' house, and I told him, yo, dog, why can't I get any more clients? And why, I feel like I have a lot to offer. I feel like the clients I'm working with are finding a lot of breakthrough in their life. Why can't I really help them? And he pretty much told me it's because I looked gross. And I was like, screw you, bro. Like, that, it like really hurt my feelings. And he up to that point, knowing me for 12 years, had never said anything so kind of harsh and direct. He's like, I think you should shave your beard. And I literally, in my head, I was like, F you, bro. Long story short, he was exactly right. That I, out of my insecurities of not being smart enough or wise enough, out of my shame of not having enough money, my ego had built a facade to be presented in some sort of way. I didn't think I was worthy of having high-ticket clients, so I dressed that way. I didn't think I was worthy or smart or wise enough to help a lot of people, and so I subconsciously was chasing them away. And the more I stepped into my true self, though, the more I realized that I did have the wisdom to help people. I am in a place where I can even make money and not be bad if I can pay my mortgage and take my kids to Disneyland. In fact, it's actually a good and beautiful quality. And because reality is negotiable, I can do so without sacrificing my integrity. That I can still do it in a way where I'm present with my kids, where I can do the things I love, that kind of thing. And so over the last couple of years, I've really begun to dismantle some of those facades that I've put out in front of me. What I've realized as I've continued on that journey, though, is not just that, like, I had these, like, shame things that were hindering me from stepping into my fullness, but that the ego was actually, it was pummeling my true self. And so, what I've had to really gently animate, and activate again is not just how I shouldn't be projecting these sort of like false narratives about myself, but I need to step into my fullness. So it's not just about dismantling the ego and just shaving a beard and not sort of acting some sort of way, but it's also about stepping into my truest self. It's about working on and manifesting and engaging with the truest version of who God has created me to be. The fear as I do this, the fear as we all do this, I see this in my office all the time. The fear in this regard is one of ego and is one of pride. I used to think that my self-expression, me being honest, would be prideful, was not humble. Me becoming my best self was pride. And that humility meant that I had to muffle my truest self. And my friends, that just could not be farther from the truth. One of the biggest lessons I've learned, and this will probably be the second book that I write, will have to do with pride and humility, or meekness and pride. In short, I'd like to give you these two definitions, and I promise we're almost done. I think pride is telling the truth, pride is lying. Pride is lying. Now, oftentimes we lie on the over, right? I'm the best in the world at this. I'm better than everybody else at this. That is pride. That is lying, if you are not actually the best in the world at that thing. But I think pride can also exist if pride is lying on the other end. I'm nothing. I don't have anything to offer. That also is not telling the truth. Humility, on the other hand, is just simply telling the truth. So it is not prideful to say, I'm a really good podcaster. It's not prideful to say, I'm a really good dad. I'm a really good mom. I'm a really good soccer player. I'm a really good painter. I'm a really good lawyer. I'm a really good barista. Whatever it is, if it is true about you, it is not pride. What pride might be is if I got on here and said, I'm the best spiritual director in the world. I'm the most enlightened person there ever was. Well, that's pride. Because I'm lying. I'm not the best there ever was. But it is also pride to make myself less than what I am. I don't have anything to offer the world. I'm not a very good listener. Don't listen to me. That is also pride. If pride comes before the fall, I think most people fall, not because they've said they're more than what they are. Most people fall because they are dishonest about what they are. They don't give themselves the chance to live into their freedom or their fullness because they're so prideful that they make themselves less than what they're supposed to be. Humility, on the other hand, is simply telling the truth. It's not being less than what you are, and it's not being more than what you are. It is being freely and fully, authentically yourself, nothing more, nothing less. So for me, one way that this has looked, first of all, is doing things like this, sharing more of my thoughts and teachings and ideas publicly, opening up my calendar to see more people. The truth is, I'm helpful. And my ego used to say, you're only helpful to a small bit. I don't think that's true anymore. My true self is helpful to a lot. I'm not the most helpful. Other people also need to be in the picture. I'm not the only healer. In fact, I'm not a healer at all, but I am very helpful. And so I'm going to do that. Another way that this is looking, and I think you all will see this as the year goes on, is in fashion. I, in my ego, had dampened some of my self-expression as it relates to the clothes I wear. And over the last year, as I've been kind of shedding my egoic postures and stepping into my fullness, I've realized how much I really enjoy expressing myself through my clothes. And so I've been saving money and buying clothes and thrifting to kind of fit a little bit more of a vibe that I want to fit, just because I think, being myself is so awesome, and it's so fun, and it's so honoring to God's design. And the ego doesn't want us to be free, the ego wants to trap us. And so as I've let go of my egoic armor, the more I've stepped into my true self in how I work, in how I present myself, and in how I express myself. A couple other questions as we wrap up my 35th birthday podcast. What part of Christianity are you still lovingly still in, and what part have you outgrown? Man, I don't know, dude. Like, in every way, I'm still a Christian. I think in every way that I think, not that I think, it's not about what I think. I follow the teachings of Jesus. I follow the teachings of the contemplatives and the mystics who follow Jesus. But I also just follow God. And I don't know, like, there's so much loving my neighbor as myself, which means I've got to see myself through the eyes of love. I'm in that part of Christianity. I'm in the part that says that everybody is beloved by God, that we were born beloved and still are. I'm in the part of Christianity that wants to take care of the poor and the marginalized, that looks for the people who are on the outskirts and wants to bring them in with womb-like compassion. I don't know. Like, the parts that I've outgrown, I would hope, are the parts that think in binary ways. So even the fact that, like, that question sort of like, and I'm not mad at you for asking this, but like the parts that I've outgrown are the parts that says there's like this or that you're either in this part of Christianity or that part of Christianity. I think our spiritual path is a path. It's a journey. It's an unfolding. It's an evolution. So I guess I've outgrown the parts that says you grow out of anything. We always are in it. We're not out of anything. So even if you believe different things than me, if you're on a different part of the path than me, neither one of us are out. We are all in. What are some practices that help you cultivate a healthy spirituality? Self-expression, Sabbath, daily breath work. All right. Well, my friends, it's been an hour, 7 minutes, and 5 seconds here on my screen. Thank you for spending time here with me on the Tyler Hill podcast on this day, my 35th birthday. I want to close with just a touch on where I'm headed, what I'm going to keep doing, and then just my last message that I really want you and I really want the world to know. Where are we headed? My wife and I are we're working towards this thing called the Center for Beloved Living. Stay tuned. It's going to be the coolest thing ever. I'm working so hard to get my book, Born Beloved, published, and we are closer than ever to hopefully having some news to share in that regard. This year, we're working towards those dreams harder than ever. This year, I have an abundance mindset. I think over the next 12 months, I'm going to have experienced love and creativity and ideas and wisdom and finances and dreams in ways that I've never known. But it's going to happen not because I'm working harder than everybody else. It's not going to happen because of some manifestation technique or something. I think it's going to happen because I'm only going to focus on a few things, and I'm going to create a lot of space for miracles. And I'm not going to be too busy or too full for a miracle to happen. Miracles can't happen until you create a space where they're necessary. And so I'm going to move where I need some miracles this year, trusting that there is an abundant God to fill empty buckets that have been put out in front of us. I hope to quit more things. I hope to quit everything that doesn't work and that isn't serving me so that I can have my hands open for the next gifts that are there. I hope that this year is physically my healthiest year. The correlation between my physical health, my mental health, and spiritual health is undeniable. And so those are some of the things that I'm just working on. And I'm working on crushing our Sabbath days with my family and the weekends, because the weekends are the best. Not because I hate the work week, but just everybody gets to be together. And I love rest more than ever. That's where we're headed. And so in closing, what does Tyler Hill, as a 35-year-old, want to leave everybody with? And I think the message really is simple. When we don't believe we're beloved, life becomes infinitely harder than it needs to be. The soil upon which you plant your seeds impacts in every conceivable way the ways in which the plant, your story, your life grows. And if you plant your seeds in a story that says you're bad, that God hates you, that God thinks you're a wretched sinner, then your life will look like that. Constantly and eternally trying to bridge the gap between you and God because you were born bad. But if you can shift that story and begin to embody this thought that you never were separate from God, and that nothing you've done, nothing that was left undone, nothing that Adam and Eve did, nothing that your parents did, nothing that was done to you could ever separate you from the love of God, that liberates you to live freely and fully yourself. And so my benediction to you would be to try and tap into that inherent belovedness, to simply receive it as the gift that it is. Because then you will no longer have to live trying to earn love, prove that you're love, hold on to love, and you can instead let go and fall into the arms of the beloved mother, the beloved father, who has been holding you since you were conceived. And in that space, you will always have everything you need. So my friends, may you this year live beloved. Grace and peace, joy and love, good sports and Star Wars, great breathwork and cold plunges to me for my birthday, and to you if you're into that sort of thing as we go through the next 12 months. Next week, we'll be back with another regularly scheduled podcast, a good interview with my friend Aaliyah. Hope to see you there on the Tyler Hill Podcast. Much love.